Welcome to another episode of Around the House. I'm your host, Steve O'Brien, and what we normally do on this show is we do home improvement projects. We do plumbing, electrical, painting, anything related to around the house. And today we're in studio. We normally go out on job sites and install windows. We do repair rotten wood, things like that. But today we're in studio, and I have a special guest today who I'd like to introduce. Mr. Dan Masse.
Steve,
Hi,
nice
Dan.
to see you.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Dan is a fourth-generation painting contractor. Dan, explain a little bit about how you got to be where you are today.
Sure, Steve. Basically, it kind of got into business by default, and the reason why I say that is I went to college, had no intentions to really get into the painting business, but I learned the craft at a very young age. My father was a painter, and his dad was also, and so wasn't his dad, so that's where the four generations come in. And just basically got out of college and had a trade under me and pursued that at that point.
And so now you started out actually painting, and as time went on, you became more of management, where you do bidding and contracts, and
Yep.
you line up a lot of work, and there's a lot involved. How many employees do you have?
We have 11 currently.
11. Wow, that's pretty big.
Yeah.
So that keeps you busy.
It does, yeah. A lot of out in the field, and between out in the field and driving around for estimates and
Sure.
and all the bidding.
I think
takes
I'd
place.
rather be painting. It's less aggravating.
Yeah, sometimes I do too.
Well, thanks again for coming in today. And you're going to show us some of the basic techniques. We're going to show the viewers some of the basic components of painting to start with. And the first thing, as Dan will probably agree with me, is the quality of the brushes that you use. So I'm going to let Dan take it from here and explain to you the sizes. There's so many different types of brushes. I'll let Dan explain how that factors into the quality of the work that you're going to do.
Sure, thanks, Steve. So the short of it is like every other trade and craft, is tools that you need to do the job. So for us, it's brushes is the priority. I mean, these are obviously rollers and spray guns and things of that nature, but your primary tool as a painter is a brush. And there's the variations of different types of brushes depending on what product you're going to use.
Well, that was always, excuse me for interrupting, but that was always, to this day, I know when you get what you pay for in a lot of cases, but there's different type brushes. Explain the different types of bristles and what some are for staining, some are for polyurethane, some are for just latex paint, some are for oil-based paint. Explain to our viewers what the different bristles mean for the type of paint you're going to use.
Sure. There's different bristles based on the type of paint that you're going to use. So you have oil-based paint, which you had mentioned. You're going to use a China bristle.
A China bristle.
And what that is, it's white or black. And you can see that when you buy it on the package. It'll say China bristle. A lot of the packaging now will actually say made for oil or latex right on the package.
Okay.
And then you have your polyester brushes, which is primarily one you use for latex paint.
Polyester. Mm-hmm.
And then you have what we call chip brushes, which is basically little small brushes. If you're going to do a small repair, you can just buy one of those once and throw it away.
Foam brush.
Exactly.
Oh, I use those a lot.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they're a time saver too.
Yeah, I don't think I'd get a quality paint job with a foam brush, but like you say, if you're doing a quick repair, a patch job or something, I've done it. I've used those foam brushes a lot. If you're going to use some kind of a polyurethane or something where you don't want to ruin a good brush, and again, if you have like a little small patch and you have to clean the brush, it probably takes longer to clean the brush than it does to actually put the paint on the product.
Exactly.
So to buy a throwaway brush, it's more practical.
Right, for a small area.
Yeah, I agree.
And the thing with the brushes is if you buy a quality brush, you can keep it for a long time if you
clean it right.
If you clean it right.
Right, and that was one of the things you're going to discuss with us today is proper cleaning techniques.
Exactly.
Great. So I'm going to let you take it from here, and you can explain. Now I see you've got a nice display there of some brushes with different size brushes. If you could explain to our viewers what these different sizes would be used for.
Steve, this one, let's start from over here. This one, I'll take it off. It's what we would say was a body brush, or a brush that you would use on the exterior of your house. It's a 4-inch brush.
Okay.
And you can use this on clapboards or shingles. This is mainly a finish brush. You use your top coat on this, whether it's a stain or a latex acrylic paint. And the reason why you want to use a 4-inch brush is because of it's just wider. You put a lot more paint on.
Faster.
Sure. And you get a lot more coverage with this.
I've seen them even wider than that.
Yeah, I've seen them up to 6 inches.
And
you know.
the only bad part with that is you can't get that into a can. You have to
Exactly.
pour it into that's okay.
That's true.
That's the only difference.
So that's the standard, typically, what you would see for an exterior brush.
Okay.
Put that one back on. And then we go down to the smaller ones. This is a 3-inch brush. This is great for trim. If you need trim on your house.
Yeah.
This is a flat brush, but it also comes in an angle.
Okay.
And it really depends on your preference on what you like to use. I typically like to use a flat brush to cut.
Now, if I could see that for 1 minute, I notice, and I've seen painters do this before, the technique for painting is they hold the brush like that,
Yep,
whereas some people hold the brush like that.
exactly.
And that is not the way to hold a brush.
Correct.
To hold a brush like that, you have more control. Is that
do.
why you hold it like that?
Exactly.
Because there's even a certain way that we have to, in our business, is to hold a hammer or a saw.
Right.
It's a technique. So-
Exactly. I mean, that's typically the way I would hold the brush, and you get a lot more control over if you're cutting in versus, if you have it way up on the handle here, you have loose control over what you're going to be
I
doing.
can see
So
that, yes.
That's the reason why you kind of hold it on what they call
Okay.
this is actually the ferrule.
Okay,
So that's the metal part of the brush.
I learned something there.
And then we can move down to some of these smaller ones. Again, this is a 2.5 inch. Again, good for trim depending on the size of the trim that you're going to be using.
I noticed that is angled.
Correct.
On the bottom.
So this is something that if you're really going to cut up, say, a corner board up against a shingle or a clapboard,
Okay.
you probably want to use the angle. You just get a lot better, cleaner cut with this.
Okay.
And then we get into some of the smaller ones. I mean, this is a perfect sash brush, for instance.
Now a sash, for the viewers that don't know what a sash is, this would be a sash. This is typically this is a sash, a window sash, right?
Correct.
And when you say a sash brush, that's meant to paint tight to the glass, or if you have dividers,
Right.
to paint the little the dividers
Correct.
in the window itself. So that's what that brush would be for.
Exactly. And this is what you would use. You'd cut in with this. Angle's always better for cutting in on the sash.
And that's a very handy brush to have.
Yes. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask also, on these type brushes here, and even those, there was somebody had told me when you buy these, some of them, the cheaper ones, there's no bristles in the center. It's almost hollow.
Correct.
So even though you might think you're getting a good deal on a brush,
Right.
usually you get what you pay for.
Exactly.
So if you look, if it's a good deal on that brush, check the bristles and make sure they're solid all the way through.
Exactly.
Right?
Right. And a good brush will run anywhere. I mean, from this, a good brush is anywhere from 15 to a 4-inch body brush can be up in the $40, $50 range
That much?
for a brush. Yeah.
$40 or $50? Wow.
You know-
Well, I guess you better learn how to take care of your brushes if you're going to spend that kind of money.
Exactly. Yeah.
I usually would buy a cheap brush, but when you use a cheap brush, the end result is you don't get as good a paint job. I've seen myself. I mean, I'm not a good painter at all. I've painted with they call it waterborne now. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
You used to call it latex, but they've added some different things to it now.
Right.
And I can remember most cases I would use latex inside around my interior trim and things like that. And what would happen was it would dry. It dries quicker than oil. So you have to keep painting into a wet surface. And as what would happen though with the waterborne is the paint started to dry, it got thick and it was like molasses. And then when you drag the brush, you see the lines from the bristles.
Right.
Is there a trick? Do you thin it out to get away from that? Is there a trick to that?
Absolutely. There's a couple of things you can do because a lot of the high solids paints now that are latex, they're really high body latex paints, and so they don't flow as easily as some of the older latex paints. The waterborne is a technology now that's come out where it's a water modified oil paint basically.
Okay.
And the reason why they've done that is because they've done away with oil paint. Well, they're starting to phase out oil paint because of the VOCs, which is volatile organic compounds, which is inside of oil paint. It's basically the smell that you smell when you have oil, and it takes longer to dry.
Yeah.
And that's because of the VOCs in the paint. So when you get back into the latex, what I recommend is you buy a little strainer,
Okay.
and you strain the paint through the strainer. And then you can add the number of products on the market that you can add as an additive into the latex paint, and you just follow the formula on the side of
You
it.
would want to use water.
No, water's probably the worst thing you could use inside a latex paint.
Really?
Because of the evaporation factor. So if you really want the paint to extend and not show as many brush strokes, you want to use what they call as a latex extender.
Oh, see, that's a new product. I've never seen that.
Yeah.
I mean, in your business, you see it all the time, but I don't use paint that often. But
Right.
That's how you would thin out your latex paint so you had more working time with it.
Exactly.
Because I know I've painted by hand. I've painted, for me, it was the worst. And you'd think it would be the easiest to do is a raised panel door, whether it be masonite or pine or whatever. And you do one panel at a time.
Yep.
And because you didn't want to leave anything to get set up tacky and
Right.
start to paint into it.
Exactly.
But it had to be the worst thing to do because it's like beat the clock. You know, you're trying to paint all that, and then you might have a little run that you spot 10 minutes after you did it, and you go to touch the little drip, and it ruins the whole paint job.
Exactly.
So with this additive, you'd alleviate a lot of that.
It opens. They call it your open time when you paint. There's an
Okay.
open time for the paint to cure.
Okay.
And when you put this additive in, it basically opens it up from 15 minutes to typically to a half an hour to 45 minutes. So you get an
wow. I
extra
didn't
time
know
to
that.
work with it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's why I always I know the painters used to always like using oil paint because you had more working time with it.
Exactly.
It always came out so much better than latex.
Yep.
Back then we call it latex, and I still call it latex because, I mean, I know what I want. I know what it is. It's
Right.
waterborne, but I think a lot of people still haven't kind of thought of that yet. They still say latex.
Sure.
But we're getting used to it. Now, Dan, is there anything else you want to go into about brushes at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I can get into the what we do to clean the brushes.
That would be good.
That's probably a
because
good thing to
you
talk
said
about.
$40 for one of the larger brushes. I think we should show people
Exactly.
how to clean them.
So, I mean, basically, I'll just take this brush off, for instance, and we'll go over basically what you want to do. You know, assume this obviously has paint all over it.
Right.
You know, some of the brushes I have, I just brought these in just to give an example of what these brushes are, but it builds up all over the brush.
Well, if I can throw this at you too, my brushes, let me grab that from you 1 minute. What happens when I'm painting in this direction, it runs down the bristles and it gets into the, what did you call it, the ferrule?
Yep.
It gets down into there, and that's where I always end up, as the brush gets older, it gets harder, it builds up and it gets harder and harder
Exactly,
and
yeah.
harder, so you end up with the bristles at the bottom are the
Right.
only part that's any good.
Right.
So you're going to show us how you get all this clean all the way through, right?
Exactly, yeah. So what I would recommend, I mean, a lot of people, they'll leave the brushes in water overnight.
I've done that. And
That's probably the worst thing you can do.
Why?
And the reason for that is it just ruins the entire bristles. It's not meant to be sitting in water the entire time.
Well, I know, I learned from my experience, I've sat it in water and I'd take the brush out and the bristles would be in the bent position.
Exactly.
So
Right.
I even hung them in there.
Yep.
But they still never seemed, it's almost like they swelled up, the bristles. It didn't.
Right. So sometimes if you do that, exactly what you said, if you have it on the bottom of a bucket, you'll end up picking it up and it'll be all curled.
And you'll never get that straight
Never get
again.
it back.
Okay.
So what you can do is when you're done, let's talk about the waterborne and the latex finishes. You can just take a warm bucket of water,
Okay.
soapy water. You can use any type of soap. And what you do is you put it in the bucket and you just kind of go up and down with it inside the bucket. And then you take this, which is called a wire brush.
Okay.
And while it's still wet, you kind of want to go through all the brush to make sure you get all that paint on. That's when you're going to eliminate a lot of that paint up
I've
in there.
never done that.
So you
Wire
take-
brush,
Yep.
that's the trick.
So you get through that, and then what you do is you put it into this, which is called, now, a lot of people, when I pull this out, they have no idea what this is.
That's quite a contraption. I
So-
didn't at first.
So what it is basically it's a brush spinner. And
Brush spinner.
so a lot of people, when they have
I've seen the old guys do it, and they put it between their hands and go like that.
right. I've seen people go like this, and they
You
flick it.
smack it on a wall or something.
Right.
That's not going to work.
No, well, it won't take as much water out of there, and the whole goal of getting a clean brush is to make sure you have a lot of the water eliminated inside of this.
Okay.
So what you do is you basically stick it into this right here, and it goes in like that. And this can fit any size brush. It's meant to clasp in. You can even fit this little one.
Okay.
It fits right around the base of the brush, and then you just give this a quick pull, and it goes right around. And you can spin it real fast, put it in a 5-gallon bucket, and that takes all the paint and everything off the brush.
So, geez, you should put some paint on the brush, put it in this tool, and go paint the ceiling with
Right.
it.
that'd be fun.
It'd be fast.
Yeah,
It make
definitely.
a mess, but
Right.
that's quite a tool.
Yeah.
Now, you use that. Now let's explain, is it the same technique for if you use oil paint? I know with oil paint, you'd use turpentine, right? Or what's the difference again, turpentine or paint thinner?
So paint thinner is what you would use to clean a brush, oil-based brush.
What's turpentine?
Turpentine is what you use to clean, like say, a surface before you paint.
Really?
Yeah, and there's denatured alcohol, which you would use to clean, say, a brush that you'd use for a stain killer. So a lot of the stain killers are on the market. If you want to clean the brush, a lot of people don't clean the brush, but if you want to, you can use denatured alcohol, and that'll take the paint
Denatured alcohol. That's the stuff that it dries very quickly.
Evaporates, yeah.
As soon as you like put it out, it's dry.
Right. And if you're going to use an epoxy, which is like if you use a garage or something like that, and you want to keep your brush, you have to use lacquer thinner, which is another type of product.
Isn't that, I've used lacquer thinner before, and that's you got to use that in a very well ventilated area.
Definitely.
Yeah, that stuff will it'll give you brain damage at the very least.
Yep,
and you don't want to be smoking a cigarette around that stuff.
No.
But that's very interesting. And you'd use the wire brush the same way you did?
Same process, yep. And then you would just, depending on the chemical of what you're using, you'd clean it with something different.
That's excellent. Well, that's certainly cleared up a lot for me, because I always had questions about brush care of good brushes. I mean, I've had good brushes over the years, and I thought I was doing the right thing by, like we talked about, you smack it on the wall or you spin it in your hands. But I again, it's just the little stuff like the wire brush. Now, would your average homeowner be justified buying one of those tools? Is that an expensive tool?
No, I mean, for the amount of money that you spend on this versus the amount of money you'd spend on brushes to save your brushes, it's worth buying this.
No,
I think you can get this in any home improvement store for around $20.
Wow, that's not bad. That's not bad at all.
It's a pretty good tool to have.
Dan, why don't you, while I'm thinking of it, why don't you tell our viewers, I don't think you told the viewers your website and your email address.
Yeah, my email address is dan@Masse Group, MASSE Group.com, and my website is www.massegroup.com.
There you go. If you want to ask Dan any questions regarding brushes, finishes, things like that, I don't think Dan will mind if you give him a call. He's a pretty easy guy to talk to. And my website is www.finishdimensions.com, and my email address is finishdimensions@yahoo.com. So as usual, feel free to email me also if you have any questions or comments about the show or any shows you've seen in the past, or maybe you have a tip for us to pass along. We'll do that for you too. Now, Dan, moving right along, again, painting a sash, right? This always intrigued me, painting windows. This window here, this is an inside of a window sash. Okay, now on the inside, you would use, your preference would be waterborne or oil-based, deciding on what your preference will say. And you'd cut it in. But before we even get to that point, we have to decide, you're gonna prime this because it's raw wood.
Correct.
But in this case, I don't know if the viewers can see, this window was never painted or finished from the factory. So the condensation, when these windows got condensation on them, which is water, it got into the wood, and you can see the brown spot. So it basically stained the wood is what it did. So now that kind of, that tells us we have to use like a sealer on that for a primer.
Right.
Right? So you'd put a sealer on that,
Correct.
and then you'd put your finish coat on.
Exactly.
Now, that's pretty cut and dry, pretty simple. Now, when you do a sealer, though, I've done some small work on little things with sealer, and some of it's sandable. Most of it's, in other words, when you seal a surface, it tends to raise the grain.
Right.
And then you have to lightly sand it with fine grit sandpaper, and then you use, what would you use to get the dust off?
So the couple of things, you can use a vacuum, or you can use basically an old brush. With painters you always see a painter carrying an old brush on them.
Okay.
And it's called a duster.
Oh, okay.
And so what it is, it's an old brush that you have, and you just go along and you take all the dust off as you're going, and that'll take a lot of the dust off.
And then you're ready for your finished coat.
And you're ready for your finished coat.
Beautiful. Now, I got another question while we got this window here. We just demonstrated how to do the inside, prime it, and then finish coat. But now on the outside, it's a little bit different, especially in the older windows, especially even if you have the separate panes of glass that were, years ago, they'd put them in the putty, and they'd putty the panes of glass in. So you had to, when you cut that paint in, I've heard a lot of stories where you get the paint, slop it all over the window, and that's supposed to make a seal. And then you don't want to cut the outside as clean as you would on the inside. Is that right?
That's correct. And a lot of times, I think what you're referring to is glazing, when they glaze a window.
The glazing, exactly.
So we do a lot of historical restoration, and there's still, believe it or not, houses that are required to keep the original windows.
Oh,
in
because
certain
they're
towns.
historic.
Correct.
Okay.
So that, in that case, they can't replace the window. So what we recommend on that is, if any of the glazings, we got to take the glazing out, and then you prime the sash without the glazing in it,
Okay.
and you go put the glazing back on top,
Oh,
which is kind of a process to a certain
That's
extent.
the right way to do it.
And then we put a primer over it after. But
Over the glazing.
Correct.
And then, but the glazing, how long does it take for the glazing to dry?
30
Before
days.
you can, 30 days.
To cure.
So a month before you can actually put a finished coat on the
Correct.
glazing compound.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, that answers a few questions I had on windows, because every house has them, and there's old houses, new houses. A lot of the new houses coming out. This particular window here is wood on the inside, and on the outside, I'll show you. It has a vinyl clad. Vinyl clad. It's not solid vinyl. These strips are solid vinyl, and these strips were meant just to hold the glass in place. These strips can be taken out, and the glass can be replaced. This is an insulated glass, but again, the outside can't be painted because it's vinyl clad over wood. And this window is probably 30 years old, and it looks pretty good. It's held up pretty nice. But it's still, as far as I'm concerned, I still like the solid vinyl windows. They seal better, they slide better. Maintenance-wise, there's no painting.
Right.
And again, how many times I've gone into a house to do some work, and the window's been stuck in the shut position.
Sure.
Now, when a painter paints a window, how do you do that without making it so that the window is stuck after the paint dries?
Well,
What do they do?
one thing you want to do is you take a putty knife after when you're done painting the sash, and you just want to run along the edge where the gasket is.
Where the runner is?
Exactly. So right here, you want to take a putty knife and run it along where it's meeting the interior or the exterior of the window.
But doesn't that ruin the paint job?
No, the putty knife's so small you can get it right in there without even
Okay,
affecting the sides.
so you're pretty much just cutting the bond where the
Exactly.
paint got on
Right.
a little bit of.
Because that's frustrating not to be able to open your windows after.
Oh, some people I've had to put a lot of work in just to get the windows, because I've had to go repair some windows. I've worked on houses with the old windows, and some of them, the older ones, have the sash weights.
Yep.
And a lot of times the windows are out of adjustment, and then they paint them and everything, and it makes sometimes not all the time. Sometimes they're worse, but I know years ago, there was ways you could oil the runners.
Yep.
Wax.
Some
put
people put wax in there.
on them.
Yep.
Again, that's high maintenance stuff.
It is.
And some people, they're not bothered by that. I prefer myself. I used to be from the old school and like doing things like that, but as I get older, it's like I'd rather be out on a golf course somewhere,
No, the technology has come so far. That's definitely
Yeah,
the case.
and energy efficiency too.
Right.
I've put in vinyl windows. We actually, our last show, we installed a vinyl window. So you'll probably, our viewers will probably see that show before they see this show. So you'll see how a vinyl window goes in. But again, painting, if you have existing windows, I like the inside to be natural wood like this one. And years ago, what we did, the big thing back in the 80s, everything was stained.
Yep.
And now everything is gone full circle to paint.
Right.
Now, whether it's going to go back to staining or not, it's anybody's guess. But I see things in the business, and you've seen this probably yourself. Wallpapering used to be a big thing.
Yep.
You don't see too much these days.
Not anymore.
Everything's painted.
Yep.
And I was the same way years ago. Everything in my house, wallpapered.
Yep.
I learned to wallpaper fast.
Sure.
And I'm not a pro at it,
Yep.
but I can do it.
Yep.
And, it's just a sign of the times. Well, Dan, we're running short on time. I'm going to close it at this point. Is there any last comments you might have for the viewers?
No, I just again I want to thank you for having me here, and hopefully tonight they'll be able to pick up some tips on painting, and
Well, I think, Dan, we can have you back. We got a lot to talk about. I didn't get to cover today because time restrictions, but I think if you're willing to come back, we can have another another show on other topics regarding paint. I think there's a lot more we can cover.
Definitely.
If you'd come back, that'd be great.
I'd love to.
We've run out of time for another show. I want to thank all my viewers for watching, and I want to thank my guest, Dan Masse of the Masse Group, for joining us today. Dan agreed to come back with us for another show, so if you want to see more of Dan and some of his techniques on painting, we're going to demonstrate more techniques on types of paint, types of methods to paint on our next episode, so I hope you can join us for that. And for now, I want to say have a good evening and thanks for watching. I'm Steve O'Brien. You've been watching Around the House.